What's up, y'all? Today I'm going to show you how I made this Indra's net type illustration in Blender shaders. It's honestly super simple. For those of you who don't know, Indra's net is this idea from Mahayana Buddhism that is used to describe the interdependence of all phenomena. And so what it is this infinite net of jewels in which each jewel infinitely reflects all of the other jewels in the net. Now, without infinite computational resources, we can't create an infinite net, but we can create very small versions of this shape with, 3 or 6 or 4 or 9 jewels. So we're going to be doing that today in Blender. I'm using Blender 4.4.0 because, as far as I know, that's the latest version of Blender that contains a repeat zone in the shaders. If they've added it back in since then, just use whichever version still supports repeat zones in the shading tab, because you will need it. So let's get into it. We are not going to need any geometry or lights, but you will need a camera. And just go to the shading workspace and go to the world. I want to pull up a texture coordinate. And we're going to be using the window. So we basically have our UV space mapped here. We're going to center it by subtracting 0.5 from the X and the Y. And this is going to be our position. And so real quick here, I'm just going to add in a little debugging nyan cat. This is just a picture, it can be anything you want. Set it to clip. And I'm going to mix it with our UV here. And I have these flipped. So we'll have it like that. Make sure this is plugged in here. And I'll use a mapping node to get this exactly scaled up how I need it to be, so we can debug with it. So basically what we're going to be doing is using circular inversion to create the jewels of the net, and we'll be using a repeat zone to iterate over several different circles in a loop, which will create the infinite recursive reflections going inside of each other. So we can just join all this. This is our debug. And we're just going to get it all out of the way here. So I'm going to put the algorithm for circular inversion on the screen. What we need is a P, a C, and an R. So this is our position, the center of the circle, and the radius of the circle. Okay, and so we start with a P minus C, which is the position minus the center of the circle. So we'll make a new group here, and we'll have our P, our center, and a float, which is our radius. And we're also going to add in a fourth float value, which is going to be keeping track of whether or not we are inside of the circle. So we can call this inside, because we're only going to do the reflection if we are inside of the circle. Okay, so the equation goes the dot product of p minus c with the dot product of p minus c, which I believe is the length of it. We're going to take that and we're going to divide the radius squared by that value. So just square your radius and divide by that dot product. And we are going to scale our p minus c value by that float. And we are going to add this final vector to our center value, 2c. So this is our inverted p-value. But what we need is to check the condition if we are inside of the circle. And the way to do this is that if the dot product value, if the square root of that is less than the radius, we are inside. So we're going to use a mix node with this is inside value coming from the less than as our mix factor between the inverted p and the original p. And this is going to give us our p prime. So if our center is directly in the center of the UV space and our radius is 0.25, let's say, we can plug this into our debug over here. And I've got them mixed up. So you want your mix nodes to actually be reversed from what I put them as. Okay, perfect. So you can see if we move the Nyan cat around with this mapping, he is perfectly reflected inside of this circle space. So that's the basic of this entire shader. We're just going to be doing this over and over again, recursively inside of a repeat zone. And the way to make sure it is recursive is that every time we check if it's inside, we take our previous is inside value, we add it to the new one coming from the less than. If it's less than the radius, then we add it and we spit it out of the group as being inside. And so this will add 1 every time. So let me show you this. What I'm going to do is set up a repeat zone. And what this repeat zone will take in is our P. It should be a vector. It will feed in to our inversion group here. And spit out over here. And what we want is to initialize the is inside in the loop. So it starts out at 0. And I'm just going to make 4 of these. So I'll put 1 at each corner. There we go. We've got a circle in each corner, and they're all about 25 across. I'm going to make the radius for all of these 0.5 so that they all touch. And make sure is inside is plugged in, connected on every node in the chain. And so we can see what's happening better. I'm going to move the neon cat to the center here. And we're going to turn the iterations up. So we're inverting several times. And that's the crux of the shader. You can see the reflections are working exactly as we'd expect them to work. So the way to get color for this is that we can color based on this is inside value. We need to take a map range because it's adding 1 every time it detects that you're inside the circle and doing the reflection, the inversion. It's adding 1. So you have to be in a range that is much larger than 1 to 0. So if we just kind of take this and turn it into some sort of, rainbow, we can do hue saturation value and far, and plug this in instead of the UV. You can see that every point of reflection, we can control the coloring. So let me just make this the first point in here black, so our background is black. You can adjust basically everything from here just with your map range and your color ramp. And that is how you get the infinite reflections within the circle. So you can basically go from here and create many different variations of this illustration by using trigonometry to determine how to lay out the initial circles in whatever kind of formation you want. The one I used in the thumbnail for this is 3 big circles with 3 inverted circles in the middle of them, and I got the equation for that from this shadertoy code I will link. I will also put in the description the sort of formula you can use to get that p-value for yourself if you'd want. But you can also just eyeball it, to be honest. If I get our young cat, completely out of the way here and put him to the side, I could easily put in a 5th circle in the middle here. Perfect center, and set the radius real small, and you'll see you can basically just eyeball it and get as good a shapes as you'd like, and it creates these beautiful circle inversion patterns. And even with our young cat all the way on the side here, you can still see him being infinitely reflected inside of the shape, no matter how far we zoom in. And that's only with 7 iterations in the repeat zone, so it's really light on the CPU load. So one thing to keep in mind is that your position, if you are rendering with, let's say, the default 1920 by 1080, you would need to change your UV space to match that, so you can do this separate in a combine XYZ respectively. And what you would want to do is get the ratio for your screen width and height. So what would I be doing? 1080 divided by 1920. And then you would multiply either your X or Y by that value to get it to match perfectly. So it's not the X, it's the Y. And now you can see these are perfect circles. So you can, of course, then scale or rotate that vector to get this image centered exactly how you want it for your final render. So I know this was quick. I was trying not to draw it out, but I think if you can figure out this part, you could figure out how to get this, exactly the rest of the way how you'd want it to be. So I hope it was inspiring, and thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day or evening.